you can try something called the cuddle maneuver, which is where you place your fingers and you open your nostrils up like that. And if it's significantly easier to breathe that way, then yes, these little hacks can really help you.
You open up your book with the story of your participation in an experiment at Stanford. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I had no intention of having myself as a character in this book. The book proposal was written months and months and months before that, and I was nowhere to be seen because I cannot stand it when writers keep unnecessarily inserting themselves into stories. It drives me crazy. But there were a few instances in which I needed to show up and I needed to test this stuff because there wasn't anyone else who was able to test it. And I had the opportunity working with these experts in the field. So this idea came up about 3 years ago when I'm lucky enough to live in San Francisco, which means I'm very close to Stanford, which is one of the top research institutions in the world. And I got to talking with the chief of rhinology research, Dr. Jayakar Nayak, about the nose, about nasal breathing, how no human really understands or appreciates the power of just breathing through the nose. And so he knew the damage that was caused by persistent mouth breathing, something that 25 to 50% of the population does. But nobody knew how quickly that damage came on. So we decided to test it. 10 days, just mouth breathing, 10 days, just nasal breathing, collecting data the whole way through.
So why is mouth breathing quote unquote dangerous? Like what are the harms that come from excessive mouth breathing?
Yeah, and I'm glad you clarified that because mouth breathing in and of itself is not a bad thing. I'm breathing through my mouth right now when I'm talking. I breathe through my mouth when I laugh, sometimes when I eat. That's all fine, but it's chronic habitual mouth breathing that is so bad for our health. Because when we breathe through our noses, we humidify air, we heat it, and we condition it so that by the time it reaches our lungs, it's treated, it's purified in some ways. When you breathe through your mouth, you get none of those benefits. You can think of the lungs as an external organ when you're breathing through the mouth. They're just exposed to allergens and pollution and whatever viruses, whatever else is in the air. And our nose is our first line of defense against all these things. And the fact that so few people know this, I certainly didn't know this, and the fact that so many people are mouth breathing, I think that there are very clear links linking mouth breathing to chronic maladies, chronic diseases.
That's fascinating. So there's a potential immune function that the nasal passageway plays as well. You mentioned.
Big time, in various ways. That's what's so interesting about it. So when you breathe through your nose, that air is moving slower, right? It's moving, there's pressure, negative pressure coming in, positive pressure coming out. Those slower breaths help relax your body. They also allow you to help upload more oxygen more efficiently. And there's one other thing in the nose. It helps to release more nitric oxide. And this is this miracle molecule that interacts directly with viruses to kill them. So breathing through the nose, especially now, is essential for good health.
I'm so glad that you brought up nitric oxide. I was going to bring it up, but you beat me to it. It is indeed a miracle molecule. And I over the past couple of months, have done a really deep dive into, all of the benefits of encouraging nitric oxide, production. I had an expert on the podcast, and we talked about how when you masticate, when you chew vegetables that contain nitrates that are naturally found in them, like beets, arugula, and things like that, you generate this gas essentially that helps to boost blood flow. It has a dilation effect. It reduces blood pressure. And so you're saying that you get those benefits, the benefits of increased nitric oxide production when you breathe through your nose as well.
That's right. You get a six-fold increase in nitric oxide breathing through your nose because the paranasal sinuses are coated with these endothelial cells, which release nitric oxide. And when you hum, you can increase that by 15 times. So humming, just humming can increase nitric oxide as well. Foods help. So nitric oxide has a very short bioavailability. It lasts for about 2 to 6 seconds. So you need to constantly be producing this in order for your body to operate correctly. And there's links, direct links between erectile dysfunction and a decrease in the production of nitric oxide. There's links between diabetes, type 2 diabetes. This goes on and on and on. You really need a lot of nitric oxide in your body all the time, and breathing through your nose is a way of helping your body do that.
Would humming during sex be advisable then?
You can do whatever you want during sex. It's not that's your own dirty business. Whatever works.
This is a safe space, James.
You can certainly try it. Might annoy your partner, but I don't know if anyone's looked into that extensively. But they have definitely looked into the links between 80% of men who have type 2 diabetes have erectile dysfunction. So that's not a random connection. And there's also a reason why sildenafil, I believe that's the actual name for Viagra, guess what it does? It releases nitric oxide in your body and allows all those things to happen. So the fact that our bodies can naturally produce this miracle gas, and the fact that our nose plays such a huge role in that, to me, I think is just fascinating.
It is fascinating. We generate a lot of really interesting hypotheses on this podcast. Whether or not they have any scientific merit, that's another story. But going back to this experiment at Stanford that you participated in, that 21-day experiment, what did that involve?
It involved just breathing through my mouth for 10 days. It was me and another subject. I managed to convince this poor breathing therapist from Sweden to fly out here on his own dime and participate in this study because Stanford didn't have any money allocated, whatever. So we had to pay for it, which was not cheap. So we had silicone up our noses, which if that sounds like it sucked, it's because it totally did. And we were just breathing through our mouths. And again, this wasn't intended to be like some prank or some stunt. We were just putting ourselves into a position that so much of the population already knew, but we were collecting data the whole way through 3 times a day with huge experiments and huge data collection in between each of the phases of this whole study. So, within a couple of hours, my blood pressure was as high as I'd ever seen it in my life. And a couple hours after that, went to sleep and I snored for an hour and a half. And I had previously not been snoring at all. And the longer the experiment went on, the more I started snoring. I was snoring for 4 hours a night. I had sleep apnea. I had hypertension. I mean, I could just give you this laundry list of bummer maladies, and they kept getting worse and worse.
Wow, that is fascinating. Yeah, so pardon me, I think I mentioned that it was I said that it was a 21-day experiment. It was a 10-day experiment. I'm just curious, did you do blood work before and after?
You were right, by the way.
Oh, I was right.
21 days.
Oh, interesting.
For the second phase, we breathed through our noses the whole time, or as often as we could. So, and compared data sets. That was the whole point of it, to see how the pathway through which we breathe air affects our bodies. Because I had been told by various researchers, by various professors, that how we breathe does not matter. We can breathe whatever way we want. The body will compensate. And we found that to be complete garbage. And there's a huge foundation of science showing otherwise as well. So, the other 11 days was much more pleasant because we were nasal breathing. We were nasal breathing at night, nasal breathing at day, nasal breathing while we're exercising, and everything else.
I love that. Were you mouth taping? Is that something that you did during the second phase?
Yeah. So this mouth taping thing sounded completely sketchy to me. This is a process or a practice in which you place a little piece of tape on your lips so that you can just breathe through your nose. And seems, a pretty weird thing until I heard about it from the doctor of speech language pathology at Stanford, who said, I prescribe it to all my patients. I talked to Dr. Mark Burhenny. He said the exact same thing. I said, what's going on here? They said, because at night, so many of us are apt to gently open our mouths when we go to sleep, right? We got gravity working against us, and I probably slept that way for decades. And one estimate is that 70% of the population sleeps with an open mouth.
Hmm.
So taping is just a way of gently closing that mouth. It's not to create a hermetic seal. It's just to train yourself to keep your mouth shut so you breathe through your nose.
And so I'm just so curious. So what did you experience then after those 10 days where you were breathing mostly through your nose?
So my health was completely wrecked from mouth breathing, and we did take blood work. We did pulmonary function tests. We did CAT scans. We did like 4 rounds of different blood work. I mean, it was awful. It was like 8 hours of getting poked and prodded. So a lot of those hormones, like there was a huge jump in cortisol for Anders. The blood, a lot of the blood work was inconsistent or didn't show too much. And what I had heard from the researchers is, these effects will probably come on in months. After several months, you should start seeing some of those broader effects. But as far as stress and heart rate variability and those more immediate changes, all of that came on immediately. High blood pressure and all that, and all of it disappeared when we started nasal breathing, which it's not like we proved anything. People have known this. Researchers have known this for decades, but it was something completely different to experience this yourself, to go from snoring at my worst 4 hours to snoring 0 minutes just by changing the pathway through which I breathe air.
In your research, did you discover any potential reasons as to why so many of us have become chronic mouth breathers?
There's so many reasons, for sure. So there's environmental factors, there's pollution, there is allergens. A lot of people are more allergic. Some people have autoimmune problems. Most asthmatics are mouth breathers. So people have inflamed turbinates. These are the structures in the nose. And some of it is anatomical. So through the last 300, 400 years of human evolution, our mouths have gotten smaller, which means our upper palates, that's the roof of your mouth, have tended to grow upward. And when they grow upward, they can block the sinus passages. So many of us are hosed just right out of the gate. So there's a lot of reasons why we become mouth breathers, and there's a lot of science showing just how deleterious this is to our health.
You were on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I'm not a regular listener of the show. I'm a fan of his. I think he does a wonderful job. But one thing that I know about him is that he had a surgery to repair a severely deviated septum. And I became aware of that because actually my little brother has a very deviated septum, and it prevents him really from breathing freely out of his nose. And so he's considering getting the surgery. I think it's called a septoplasty.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've looked into for people who have structural challenges when it comes to breathing out of their noses?
Some people absolutely need surgical interventions, without a doubt. And I was a great candidate for that. We took a CAT scan of my head, and Nyack, the chief of rhinology research at Stanford, started laughing. You don't want your doctor laughing when he's looking at scans of you. He's like, you are so completely messed up. I've broken my nose like 3 times, 4 times. Very deviated septum. I have concha bullosa. Sorry, not up on my Latin. Which are all these deformities in my nose. And he's like, this could really help you out. But then I went down the hall and started talking to other researchers who said, you start slow and steady and try to see what breathing can do for you, because the body is malleable. It shifts depending on what inputs are given to it. And so you could try that. And I absolutely have been transformed by just doing that. I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone. I will say something, though, that a lot of people go into their ENTs, and their ENTs will look at their scans and say, you have a deviated septum. You need to get this fixed. 75% of the population has a deviated septum. So some people have a very deviated septum, and then absolutely septoplasty can really help them. But a lot of people just have a slight deviation in their septum, where if they follow healthy breathing habits, that can have an outsized effect on their ability to nasal breathe. So again, no blanket prescriptions here, but to me, it makes a lot more sense to see what you can do with your natural body before going under the knife.
So wait, you're saying that if you have a mildly deviated septum, you can remodel your sinus airways by just concentrating on nose breathing, or by prioritizing nose breathing?
You will not be remodeling any skeleton in there, but what you will be doing is you will be toning all of the other passages, the turbinates, all of the other erectile tissue in there to dilate, to open up a lot more, and that will allow you to breathe much more easily. And we've seen this time and time again in CAT scans. I took a CAT scan a year before and a year after practicing healthy breathing, after practicing healthy oral posture, after using this device, which helped to stimulate chewing stress, which toned my airway. My airway opened up about 15 to 20% in some areas, and I'm no exception. There's hundreds and hundreds of people that have done the same thing and shown the same benefits. So again, I want to be clear: this is not a blanket prescription for everyone to not get surgery or to get surgery or whatever. Everyone is different. But it's my belief that if we start with easier, free techniques to see what our bodies can do, we can benefit from that. And then you can make a more reasoned decision as to whether or not you need further interventions.
Love that. You know, something that I've discovered recently that I think is pretty could reasonably be recommended to a wide population. I've become kind of hooked on nose strips, like the strips that expand your nasal airways. You know, I actually think that, you know, the term biohacking is sort of thrown about these days, and very little of what you see in the biohacking realm is true biohacking. But I think that actually a nasal strip, because it's hacking the architecture of your nose in a non-permanent way, is actually deserving of the term. And so my reasoning is that if any, you know, if airflow is the rate limiting factor in the production of nitric oxide, then any sort of increase in airflow is going to potentially be beneficial. So I've been using these strips every night when I go to sleep. And now if I don't have them around, or I forget to put them on, I actually like get out of bed and I go put them on. I'm that hooked on them.
These are great training wheels, and I think that it's an awesome idea. Like, how much do those cost? Not a lot. How much effort is it to use these things? Not too much effort. So you can try something if you're talking about nostrils. You can try something called the cuddle maneuver, which is where you place your fingers and you open your nostrils up like that. And if it's significantly easier to breathe that way, then yes, these little hacks can really help you. There's something called mute inserts, which I've used before. You insert them into your nostrils. They help open up. Breathe right strips work great. And what I've found, at least talking to people, and I use some of these things when I was exercising, trying to adapt to nasal breathing during exercise, and they work great. And then after a couple of weeks, I didn't need them. And that's usually what happens. You can acclimate your body. You can start to condition those tissues, those different structures to widen up. And then you just don't need them. If you have to continue using them, that's okay too. To me, and this is just my personal opinion, that might be better than going and getting surgery. But again, everyone's different, and surgery has been transformative for so many people. But there's just a lot of options on the table for people.
Yeah, and surgery is not without risk. But even my brother who has a severely deviated septum, he's benefited from those nasal strips. I've found, just anecdotally, that my favorite ones are the generic CVS brand. You know, I have a CVS close to my house. Just the generic nasal strips. The what are they? The breathe right strips. I find that they leave a residue on my nose and they're hard to pull off.
Yeah, again, personal preference. Some people really dig those. Other people like the non brand name ones. As far as sleep tape goes, I'm a big fan of just this 3M stuff, micropore sensitive skin tape. This costs like $3. It lasts 3 months. That's pretty cheap. People like Somnifix, which is a brand of sleep tape. It's a lot more expensive. They say it's more comfortable. Whatever works, you know, by any means, whatever works to allow you to breathe through your nose that's the right thing to do for you.
I love that. What's one of the more surprising things that you discovered while writing this book? I'm sure there were many mind-blowing moments for you, but if you could just think back to, like, you know, something that you discovered that just blew your worldview wide open.
Well, I think it was two things. I know you only want one. I'll mention two briefly.
I'll take two.
It was okay.
Two for the price of one.
Thank you. Yeah. It's discount day. It's Tuesday, so it's the fact that we're so messed up. Like the fact that evolution is not progressive. This was complete news to me, that evolution means change. It doesn't mean survival of the fittest. If it meant survival of the fittest, why are so many of us obese? Why do we have autoimmune diseases? Why do we have asthma? It just doesn't make any sense. And once you learn that, you can't unlearn it. You're like, wow, I've been taught something completely different for so long. And now that I understand that life can change in ways that are not advantageous for their long-term survival, it starts making the world a little more clear in the way that things are functioning right now, especially with our species. The second thing that blew me away, which continues to blow me away, and next week I'm doing a little more research in this area, is the fact that we can use breathing to heat our bodies up. And the fact that monks have been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. This sounded like complete fabrication, that someone could sit in the snow and breathe in a certain way for 8 hours and melt a circle around them in the middle of winter. It sounds fallacious, right? Until you learn that Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School went out and tested these guys and found that we can do exactly that. And Wim Hof, which I'm sure you've heard of, he's the one who's really blowing this up and showing people the true power of their breathing to not only heat themselves, but to heal themselves of so many chronic conditions.
Didn't Wim Hof make headlines when his breathing method prevented an inflammatory challenge from showing up on blood labs? Wasn't there something that he did that like actually affected whether or not he, became vulnerable to some kind of endotoxin that was injected into his blood?
Yeah, and this is what really blew things up in this world and continues just to confound me. And it's been interesting that some researchers have denied that this happened because it's so outside of their worldview, even though the study was published in Nature, the top scientific journal in the world.
Yeah.
And even though people are demonstrating this all the time. So anyway, we'll get into that later. But what happened is they took Wim into a lab and they shot him up with E. coli. And if you get an E. coli infection, which is an endotoxin, you start sweating, you get a fever, you get chills, you're totally miserable. So they shot him up with E. coli. He breathed in his Wim Hof way, doing that Tumo breathing, and he was completely fine. He had basically no symptoms. He got up, got a cup of coffee. So the researchers told him, they said, listen, you're just this super weirdo. We see that you can do this, and that's cool. But anyway, we're moving on. And Wim challenged them. He said, give me any group of people and give me 4 days, and I will teach them how to do this. So that's exactly what they did a few years later. They did a randomized controlled study in which they had a control group, and then they had the group that learned Wim's method. And guess what happened? Every single one of those people who learned his method went in, were shot up with E. coli, breathed in that pattern, and didn't suffer any symptoms of E. coli. Meanwhile, all of the controls suffered extreme symptoms of E. coli. So there's the proof, everybody, and they're just trying to get their heads around how exactly this works. Down at University of California, San Francisco, Alyssa Epple just concluded a study in rheumatoid arthritis and this breathing method. I'm talking to her next week about all this.
She's a telomere researcher, isn't she?
She is indeed, yes.
She is, yeah. Love her work. So, I mean, obviously, we're just sort of at the very beginning of unraveling how his method may have prevented, infection from E. coli. But is there any? Can you speculate at all? I mean, like why that might have worked the way that it did?
Absolutely. So what happens when you breathe this way is you stress your body out. And a lot of people are thinking, I don't want to be stressed. I'm stressed all day. So a lot of us carry around this low-grade stress, which is so unhealthy. It gives us chronic inflammation, which leads to so many modern diseases. I was talking to Dr. David Haskam last week, and he said every modern disease is a disease of inflammation. Alzheimer's, diabetes, on every autoimmune disease, on and on and on. So we don't want this chronic low-grade stress, but we do want bursts of stress. And this is what Alyssa Epple is working on, this hermetic stress or hormesis, where you control your stress to a specific amount of time so that for the rest of the day, you can chill out. So that is probably why Wim Hof's method works so well, and why you can get shot up with E. coli and not suffer from any symptoms. Because when we stress our bodies out, when we're breathing like this, we release adrenaline, norepinephrine, and other hormones that actually fight off viruses. So the sympathetic state is the state in which we can help fight off viruses and toxins. And so that's what it does. That's the ongoing theory right now, is when you know you're exposed to something, you can do this method and help your body combat it very quickly. And very anecdotally here, a couple years ago when I felt a very bad cold coming on, I went and did this method. I really went for it for half an hour and came out and I didn't have a cold. What does that mean? Nothing much. But I've heard the same thing from literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And it's free and it makes you feel good, so why not give it a go?
So you're forcing an acute sympathetic state that just basically puts your immune system on high alert.
Exactly right. I wish I could have said it that succinctly. I feel like a fool. The next answer will be extremely succinct, like a haiku. I promise.
As succinct as that. You're doing pretty well, James. Have you done any in your book? Do you talk about the difference between diaphragmatic breathing versus like the more shallow upper body chest breathing that so many of us seem to be stuck, in that sort of mode of breathing these days?
Sure. So your posture dictates how you breathe, and your breathing dictates your posture. So if you're like me, if you're an office bozo and you're just sitting in front of a computer all day long, you tend to be hunched over like this. Even if you want to take a very deep fluid breath, you can't, because your back is arched. So you can only take many very short and stilted breaths. I was talking to Patrick McEwen, who's a world-renowned breathing expert, and he showed me this chart that just blew me away. When we breathe just into our chest, and we breathe about 18 times a minute, which is on the upper end of average, but so many people breathe this way, we only use 50% of that oxygen we take in. So the rest of it just goes into our mouths, our throats, the bronchi, and we breathe it back out. Because just a little bit of it actually makes it to the lungs and can participate in gas exchange. But when we breathe slowly at a rate of about 6 times a minute, we use 85% of our breath. So a 35% increase in efficiency. And who the hell doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to run more efficiently? So this very slow and stilted breathing will force us to overwork our bodies, overwork our hearts, overwork so many other systems in our body, and eventually our bodies are going to break down. So that's one reason to take fewer breaths, but deeper breaths, and to engage that diaphragm and do what it is naturally designed to do.
I love that. I think we're also more inclined to breathe shallowly when we're stressed out, as opposed to just being merely a function of posture. I think when you're stressed, you take these like short breaths. And you got me thinking whether or not we can de-stress ourselves by forcing deeper breaths.
For sure. And yeah, I should have mentioned that. So when we're stressed out, when we have a perceived threat, we do what we're conditioned to do. We either hold our breath or we breathe too much. Because back in the day, when we were hiding from enemies in a cave or hiding from a woolly mammoth or whatever, what is your best defense? To be silent or to breathe a bunch so you can get more blood to your skeletal muscles so you can run faster or fight harder, right? So these are wonderful things to be programmed with. But now our perceived view of threats is so low that we get an email from our boss and our bodies react as though it were a severe life-threatening situation. And so we have this response where we either hold our breath or we breathe way too much. And this is so well known. It's called constant partial attention syndrome. It's been studied by someone at another doctor at UCSF, Margaret Chesney, for about 20 years. NIH studies, legit stuff. It's also known as email apnea. And one estimate says that 80% of office workers suffer from this. I wanted to see if I suffered from it, so I wore a pulse oximeter, and I wore it for several days, and I looked at my breathing throughout my workday, and it was a total disaster. I was holding my breath or breathing way too much the whole time, and no wonder I was so exhausted at the end of work days.
Email apnea. So just the waiting on bated breath for every, for all the notifications and whatever, that it's actually causing us to breathe differently in a more counterproductive way.
Yeah, and what Margaret Chesney has found is she said it can have some of the same downstream effects of sleep apnea. It can give us chronic inflammation. It can stress us out. It can boost our blood sugar, which is not always a good thing. It can have this little adrenaline, elicit this adrenaline drip, on norepinephrine, on and on and on. All those hormones are great. Those reactions are great when we need them. But to do them throughout the day when there is no threat is going to wear us down. I mean, look at how many people have autoimmune diseases right now. How many people have diabetes? How many people have depression or anxiety or panic? Things aren't good for us right now, and our breathing plays a really large part in that.
So what's the prescription then for listeners to make sure that their breath, that they're breathing deeply with their diaphragms, and to let that sort of guide their posture, to let their breath lead the way, so to speak?
There is one blanket prescription I'm going to give everyone. That doesn't matter if you're an asthmatic or you suffer from anxiety or if you're an ultra marathoner or whatever. So breathe through your nose. Breathe through your nose all the time. If your nose is clogged, figure out a way of opening your nose. Nyack told me, he's like, if a sink is clogged in your house, what do? You find a way of opening it. So breathe through your nose, breathe slowly, breathe less, train yourself to breathe less, okay? By breathing less, we get more oxygen. We get more energy with less effort. That's what you want. And to exhale fully. So a lot of us will tend to think we're breathing deep. We'll go, yeah, deep breaths, this is cool. Yeah, I can really feel it. This is awesome. But we don't exhale. So we're just forcing air on top of air on top of air. What you want to do is exhale first fully, and then take that deep breath. That engages the diaphragm, full diaphragmatic movement. And so breathing isn't just a biochemical process, it's biomechanical. That diaphragm moving up and down helps with circulation and helps to pump lymph fluid. This is how lymph fluid gets away from our organs. And I'm talking to another doctor on Friday about all of this stuff. We're going to do a video interview because I've just gotten clued into this that we'll have on the site and be available for free for everyone.
I just love that you've covered this topic in your work and that you've become a champion for nose breathing. It's so important. Ever since I started looking into the literature, my mind, like yours, I'm sure was before you wrote the book, has just been completely blown by this, and it's become something in my life that is now a staple. Just like eating a nutritious diet, exercising regularly, making sure that I'm managing my stress, breathing through my nose is something that I'm now, it's now always in my purview.
And that's a good thing. It's a weird thing to pick that as my campaign, but it was only after years and years of listening to so many researchers and looking at the science, it was so undeniable, and yet no one's really talking about it. I mean, think about when you go to your doctor. They check your blood pressure. They ask if you have any anxiety. They ask maybe about your sexual performance. They ask about migraines, but they don't ever talk to you about your breathing. They don't look at your levels of O2 or CO2, but breathing is the anchor to so many of those issues. And if you fix your breathing, as we've seen very clearly, you can really blunt the symptoms, or in some extraordinary cases, heal yourself of those chronic problems. I know this sounds nutso, but the science, again, is very clear, and I could give you the phone numbers of 24 people who have done just that.
Man. In LA, where I live, there many people are obsessed with breath work, which is ranges from holotropic breathing, to various meditation ceremonies. Have you studied that at all in your journey?
I have. I just spilled water all over myself. So thank God this isn't all video. I guess it is. I'm hosed.
It's
Hopefully you
okay.
can
Just
see that.
just breathe deeply so that you don't have a stress
Yeah,
response. Well, I can't see
maybe
the
it
water.
looks like I just coughed up some vomit on my lunch on my shirt. So taken out of context, this could really be incriminating. Let's talk about, speaking of vomit, let's talk about holotropic breathwork. So holotropic breathwork is this breathing practice in which you breathe as hard as you can in a room full of people listening to very loud music, and you do this for 3 hours. And if that sounds like things are going to get weird, they get real weird real quick. And so some people can have very severe reactions to this, bowel reactions or vomit reactions. That does not happen too often, but it can happen. And the point of doing this is to break through chronic problems. The thinking is this is a baptism by fire method of really opening up your subconscious and unconscious mind and bringing your problems to the surface so that you can better process them. The science is not very thorough in this area. We know what happens to the body when you breathe this much. However, I will say the studies I've seen and the people who have practiced this that I've talked to, James Ironman is a great example. He ran this with 11,000 people in a hospital in St. Louis and followed over 400 of them and found that this had a profound benefit for these people, whether or not they had depression or they were addicts or they had other psychoses. So there it is. I wish that there were more studies on it. There's not, but breathing is free, and I promise you it is an extremely surreal experience. So you could give it a go. Tell me what you think.
You know, people love to do it in LA. I've never been a big fan. The experience has always been a little bit too uncomfortable for me. But one of our colleagues in journalism, Michael Pollan, I had him on the show, and we talked about how holotropic breathing has been, there are at least some similarities to the shift in consciousness that occurs when you take psychedelic drugs, like psilocybin mushrooms, and that, these could be a sort of more mild and, of course, drug-free means to unraveling the psyche in the way that they're now kind of looking at these drugs, for their potential to ease things like PTSD, depression, addictions, and things like that. So, a very interesting line of research indeed.
That's how it was developed. So it was developed by Stan Grof, who was a big proponent of using LSD with his patients. And when LSD was made illegal in 1968, he looked for other methods to elicit those same reactions, and he developed holotropic breathwork. So what is interesting is looking at the biochemistry, is looking at what happens to the body when we breathe really hard for a really long time. And they've found that you can decrease the blood flow to the brain by about 40% in extreme cases. And what this does is it cuts off certain centers in your brain that are dealing with day-to-day life. And so the thinking is that by cutting off some of these centers to the brain, other centers can help open. You can process thoughts in a different way. So we know it's doing something, and you can certainly feel it and experience this when you do it. It is a deep dreamlike state that you put yourself into for hours. But what exactly is it doing? I don't know if we're ever going to know. And I've been trying to get in a lab to do EEG studies or fMRI studies of holotropic breathing because I can't find any. So I have volunteered to go in and breathe this way for 3 hours so we can really look at what happens to the body. Now COVID's around, that got, put on the back burner, but hopefully in the next few months I'm going to be able to do this.
I love it. How has your life changed since writing breath? Any new practices that you've integrated into your day? What's been your life like in the wake of writing this book?
Yeah, well, writing a book about breathing makes you a complete breathing neurotic. I don't suggest anyone do it. It will drive you crazy. But the point to train yourself to breathe in these ways isn't so that you constantly have to think about it. It's so that they become a habit. And if you're a really bad breather like I was through so much of my life, it takes a long time to break habits. I'm still working on it. I still use sleep tape every single night. I've used it for 2 years and have experienced a huge benefit from doing that. So another thing is people expect me to now, be like the best breather in the world, but I'm not. Just like pollen isn't the best drug taker in the world. I'm a journalist who went into this field to write about some of the best breathers in the world, to write about the experts, and to glean a few of their hacks along the way. So yeah, I've incorporated the stuff into my life. Yeah, I've felt completely transformed from it, but that's no proof of anything, which is why I had to rely so heavily on the science, because these claims sound impossible. There's 500 scientific references in the back of the book and on the website for people to look up, but this is stuff that we've known for so long. It just hasn't really come to the surface in any way and gotten to the hands of the general public. And as a journalist, that's what I do, what I try to do.
It's amazing. Your book has been so successful. Has it, do you think, helped draw more attention, especially from, academia, to the value of breath?
Yeah, and this is really the highest compliment and the thing that really gets me the most giddy. It's interesting to go into these institutions to find research that has been done at these institutions, write about it, and then have the same institutions come back to you and say, hey, we didn't know about any of this. Can you come speak at our medical school? So the best letters I've been getting, I've gotten dozens and dozens and dozens of them, maybe even hundreds of them, are from doctors, are from dentists, some of whom have been saying, this is what I've been talking about for 30 years. No one's been listening. And others who have said, this all makes perfect sense. Why haven't we known about it? I'm going to go do something about this. So I've had the honor of speaking at Stanford Medical School. I'm speaking at Yale and Harvard next year. It seems like there's a lot of interest in breathing right now, especially amidst this pandemic. It's better late than never. And I'm so excited to get this word out, and I'm so excited to get more researchers interested in studying this stuff and getting the word out, because really it comes from them. They're the ones kickstarting how this thing is going to get to patients. And so it can't just come from a journalist. It really has to come from academics who understand this and who have tested it thoroughly.
Yeah, I love that. What's next for you? Can you give us any hints?
I'm going to turn off my phone for 10 days and sleep for a while. It's been a little crazy, 6 months. Amazing, but I'm a little exhausted at this time, I'll be honest. So we're hoping in the new year, this is all knock on wood stuff, but to turn this into a mini series. And that's what I'd really like to do in the next year, because a lot of people read books, but a lot of people don't read books, who might be turned on to this stuff to help take control of their own bodies through other mediums. And so there's that, and I have a few other creative projects and a few other book ideas, but I just need a reset, and that thank God the holidays are coming, and I'll figure out how to tackle all that next.
You need a breather. See what I did there?
Some might say I need to just chill out. I hadn't had those hacks, I probably would have been in much worse shape. So it's stuff that I use every single day and have really felt and seen measured improvement in my life.
Well, your work is so important. It's added so much value, and I'm so glad that I got a hold of your book and that I listened to it. And you're also a wonderful writer, so I implore people listening to this to go and check out Breath. It's also on Audible. It's very well done. I've got just one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can listeners find you on social media, and where can they find your book? I mean, I'm assuming it's everywhere, but
sure, wherever books are sold, which I guess nowadays means like Amazon or no, go to your local indie, people. Ignore what I just said. Cut that out.
Support your local bookstores.
That's right.
Yes.
So my website, the publisher allowed me to publish the entire bibliography on the website, and that's available for free for anyone. There are also breathing instructions by doctors at Johns Hopkins and Columbia, and Dr. Andrew Wiles on there. I'm doing expert interviews with professors at Harvard all about breathing, and that's available at mrjamesnestor.com. That's mrjamesnestor.com. Some other ass took James Nestor, so that's when I'm stuck with people. I'm trying to get better at this thing called social media. I don't know if you've heard about it. I'm a little old, so I am on Instagram and I'm just posting stuff related to breathing and the science therein. No puppies or good looking food on my site. I
Oh
promise.
man, I like Mr. James. It's better than the when people put the before their names. It's a little pretentious, like thejamesnestor.com. I think Mr. is fine. It
Thank you for that.
yeah,
Appreciate that.
it works. Not something I ever have
I
to
get
worry about.
I get a lot of gruff from people. People think that's pretentious, and I said, "Hey, some sculptor in Michigan took my URL, so I got to wait around for that guy to give that up to the internet, and then we'll see what happens."
Yeah. Well, the last question that gets asked to everybody on the show, Mr. James Nestor, what does it mean to you to live a genius life? What does living a genius life mean to you?
I think it means to be flexible, to be open, to listen to as many people as often as you possibly can, and to take that information, be skeptical about it, and check it out. I think that when you think of science, this is not a closed book. Science is constantly changing. So the thought that you can just stop your belief system at one point doesn't make any sense scientifically. So that flexibility and that curiosity, I think, is what really drives science and what drives journalists.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one.
I find that sometimes we feel burnt out, not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that make us come alive. Because I think one of the best ways of learning something is to teach it to somebody else. It's not just what you eat, it's how you eat.
A world-renowned brain expert here in the house. So I want to talk to you about unlocking your brain's potential.
Yeah.
And you came in with some things that you specifically wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I was just talking about some of the things during the pandemic. The metaphor I was using with clients is, we understand things based on symbols, metaphors, relating things, something we don't know to something we already know. Right, it's a great way of hacking your learning. And the metaphor I was using is that of a butterfly. And I feel like a butterfly is the profound symbol of transformation, right? And while the beauty is in the butterfly, a lot of growth happens in the cocoon. And I think a lot of times, people the past couple of years, they feel like they've been cocooning, right? They've been physically distancing themselves. They might be working remotely or learning, from home. They might be alone with their doubts. They might be alone with their fears. There's a lot of fear out there. And they might be feeling, lonely, and mental health is a big challenge. So in Limitless, I have a quote from a French philosopher, and he says, "Life is the C between B and D," which is interesting. Life is C between B and D, and B stands for birth, D stands for death, life, C, choice.
Hmm.
I really do believe that these difficult times, they could define us. These difficult times can diminish us, or these difficult times could actually develop us. We decide. We always decide on our choices. We could decide on our thoughts. We could decide on our behaviors. We could decide on what experiences mean. We could decide on how we want to feel more often. We certainly could decide what we put in our mind and in our body also as well, how we move our body. And just reminding people. So there are about 5 or 6 choices. Just I want to remind everybody, who's listening, that you could make to come out of this cocoon stronger, so that you could potentially even soar to new heights, right? I'll make them all C's because I tend to alliterate everything just to make it a little bit more memorable. I'm kind of OCD like that. And then we could chat about it. The first one, I think, in no specific order, the first C is clarity. I think solitude is a wonderful time for self-reflection. I don't think, I think self-awareness is a superpower, and we don't, always in society when we're going 100 miles an hour, we don't take time and just kind of check in with ourselves, in terms of, one of the clarifying questions I love: what's most important to you in blank? What's most important to you in life? What's most important to you in a career? What's most important to you, if in zero-based thinking, if we're, with everything going on, if you're to start over, what's most important to you in a relationship, in your personal contribution, in your health, right? So that gives us some values, because sometimes, again, there's a great book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a classic by Dr. Stephen Covey. He says, you don't want to climb the ladder of success, get to the top and realize it's leaning on the wrong wall,
Hmm.
right? And the second clarifying question, I think, besides what's most important to you in these areas, and which I would encourage everyone to use this time to do, is are my actions today, align with those values? Are they supporting, that direction? Meaning a lot of people, I'm sure, who are listening or watching on YouTube, that they feel like burnt out. They feel mentally exhausted, right? And they think it's because they're doing too much. And while that might be a contributing factor, I find that sometimes we feel burnt out not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing too little of the things that make us come alive.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And so those are the things that we're kind of pinpointing our target, our true north, what's most important to us in these areas, and our daily activities, leading us there. That's clarity. The second C I would say, which your podcast covers in so well, is care. We know that self care is not selfish, and I don't just mean eating the best amazing foods ever and optimizing our sleep. I also mean like part of self care is putting borders and boundaries around the things that are important to us, and also being conscious and standing guard to our mind of what we're letting inside. Meaning, we know when we're talking about the brain that with media, it's interesting. There's an algorithm kind of like with our mind, like there is with Instagram or any social media. The algorithm primarily is whatever you engage with the most, you're gonna get more of, right? So if you watch your cat videos and cat posts, you're engaging and you're sharing cats, you're liking it, commenting on cat posts, then the algorithm shows you more cats, right?
Guilty, yes.
Right. And then also, but our mind has a similar algorithm. And if we're just watching like the news and what's, on social media, dark, threatening, scary and fearful because our amygdala is getting hijacked. If it bleeds, it leads, that whole thing. We have to be very conscious because if that's what we're engaging with, then our mind's algorithm is going to, the filter, because we could pay attention to a billion different stimuli. Primarily, I think our brain deletes more, right? Otherwise we would be overloaded, overwhelmed. And so what it lets in are the things that you're building awareness for, you have questions about, that have dominant importance for. And if you're engaging with what's dark and scary, the challenge is we start seeing more and more of that in our, in our perception. And that doesn't leave a lot of bandwidth for possibility, hope, opportunity, what you could be grateful for, right? And so that could be a challenge. We know that chronic stress has been shown to shrink the human brain. Chronic fear actually suppresses our immune system. So that's interesting, right? A whole area of science called psychoneuroimmunology. It makes you more susceptible to colds, to flus, to viruses, right? And so when we're talking about care, obviously there are a lot of things we could do to care for ourselves. And I'm just kind of highlighting the thing that might not be is what we're feeding our minds. And so we can make choices. We can make choices for clarity, is making these questions, choices going back to power decisions on what we're feeding our minds and our bodies. Third C is kind of obvious, but it's not something we think about all the time. I think one of the antidotes to fear, going back to fear, is besides gratitude. And a lot of times we know gratitude. I did a Thanksgiving episode on our podcast about how gratitude can rewire our nervous system for performance. And it's interesting because you don't have to wait for a greater life to feel grateful. You
Hmm.
could start feeling grateful, and I think people would immediately say they have a greater life. Because what we appreciate appreciates, right? Yeah, it gets better and it grows. But going back to that's one antidote to fear. The other one I would say is the third C, which is contribution.
Hmm.
I think making a difference. I think even for me, like growing up with learning difficulties, my biggest challenge, I mean, my superpower was being invisible, right? I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to, maybe deep down, I wanted to be seen and heard, but I was mostly hiding, in the back, sitting behind a tall kid because I never had the answers. So I was very phobic of public speaking, which the universe has this, sense of humor because my two biggest challenges were learning and public speaking. And, what do I do for a living? I
I
was
mean, now you're educating the world on how to learn faster, and
doing,
you
yeah,
talk publicly for a living.
yeah, and so it's kind of it's kind of interesting how your struggles can become strengths, right?
Mm.
Your their challenges could lead to change, which was what I'm hoping for with my sleep, right? Because of all this perfect storm of having this kind of severe challenge I want to overcome. I think one nice dominant question to ask yourself is, where's the gift in this? My challenges were learning, and the gift was I discovered how to learn better, right? I don't believe it's how smart you are. It's We've talked about this in previous podcasts. So it's really, how are you smart? My challenge was public speaking. I would be, I'd be so fearful. I would be shaking and almost pass out. And that led to a strength. And I hope there's a gift in even the challenges I had with sleep. I could tell you two of them automatically. Number one, with the lack of sleep, it forced me to double down on everything I teach.
Hmm.
Because how would I be able to perform and do anything if I wasn't, be able to have that edge of reading faster, remembering things, and assimilating information, and all my routines and everything. But the other gift was it forced me to be very conscious of my commitments. I don't know how it is with you, but some people who are watching might identify with saying yes too often, right? You overcommit, you have too many browsers open, and it uses up so much energy. And so when you have a finite, you feel like you have a limited amount of energy or temperament or emotion or, and like with your lack of sleep, then I don't say yeah. Everything for me is really, it's heck yes or heck no. I mean, that kind of filter. And so like right now, there's nowhere I'd rather be with no one else. You know what I mean? So everything is like it's very, makes things very clear, which I think it's important nowadays for people who are struggling with mental exhaustion, mental fatigue, burnout.
People are so lax with their time, and it is the most precious and limited resource that we have. Once you spend it, you don't get it back.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. I mean, people could always make more money, I mean, and it's the one thing that's actually, equal, at least in a day. And not everybody has the same income or the same education level or the same network, right? But everybody has 24 hours in a day, right? We have 80, what is it, 86,400 seconds. And what we invest, we get to keep in the future, but in whatever's not, it's just lost,
Hmm.
right? And there's no judgment. People want to binge watch, and do like whatever they do, or that's their life, then it's prerogative. People have choice and free will. It's amazing. But then we can't complain about stuff then, right? I mean, you can't be upset by the results you didn't get by the work you didn't do. So a lot of energy goes into complaining and comparison and overthinking, and we try to direct our clients away from that. But going back to contribution, I just feel like it's the antidote to fear. It's if I get nervous a little bit still, butterflies before. I'm here in Los Angeles. I just spoke for 2,000 people yesterday. I'm going out tomorrow to Vegas to speak for thousands there, and I still get a little nervous, but then I just think about contribution. Like I think about one person in that audience whose life, needs to could use some of this information, and I feel more obligation to be able to do that, because shame on me if there's somebody there struggling like I did so for so many years, and I don't help them, and that gets me out of myself and that contribution. So for us, we like Limitless, we gave away 100% of the proceeds, multiple six figures to build schools. We built schools everywhere from Ghana to Guatemala to Kenya, full health care for the children, clean water, also Alzheimer's research. So many great organizations that you and I know of, and some of um, our peers. I lost my grandmother to Alzheimer's when I was going through my learning difficulties, and women, as you know, are twice as likely to experience Alzheimer's than men. So for specifically women's research,
Love that.
um, so yeah, but I mean, in terms of contribution, it doesn't have to be like that. It could be, how can you invest some of a little bit of your time, your talent, your treasure, just to make a difference and just put you in a good place. Maybe make it food for frontline workers. Maybe it's checking on somebody who's elderly and a little bit compromised and they're lonely, that kind of thing. And then finally, the last couple of C's, besides clarity and care and contribution, I would say creativity. Like I don't know, what have you been doing the past year and a half? I mean, everybody has like a to-do list, but do we have like a create list?
So
I
important.
yeah, I mean, I think the future belongs to creators. So I love it, that some people creating new businesses, some people are doing their music, and then they get the
Yeah.
guitar and they're singing. Other people are writing, but I think even before this, jobs are going to they're being outsourced, right? They're going to automation, they're going to artificial intelligence, and what's not going to be outsourced to a machine is what's truly limitless. Like there's no limit to our creativity. There's no limit to human imagination. There's no limit to our ability to solve problems, our ability to come together, in difficult times. And so, yeah, it's interesting. There's during the Great Plague that Shakespeare, when I was doing research, created some amazing masterpieces. Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra. During the plague, Isaac Newton had to physically distance himself from London. They closed down the university there, and he had to go home. Even back then, and he was sitting underneath a tree, and an apple fell on his head, and he created the theories of motion, the theories of gravity,
Hmm.
right? And so again, we don't have to do it at that level, but what have you always wanted to create, in your life? Maybe you're a parent, you wanted to create something, for your for your students, for your kids, maybe like homeschool. It's whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it
I'd love
reminds
to
me
hear.
of one of my favorite lines from Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
Peter Baelish is talking to Varys in the I forget what it's called, like the main throne area
Hmm.
in at King's Landing, and Varys says to Peter Baelish, just everything is in such disarray. Everybody's warring, fighting. There's so much chaos, and Varys makes a comment implying that chaos is a pit. It's like a pit of despair, a pit into which all hope falls, never to be seen again, right? And Baelish responds to him, Varys, chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. And I just love that. It
That
reminds
is
me
really good.
of that.
With the accent and everything.
Yeah, with the accent and
Yeah.
everything. It's one of my favorite lines in one of my favorite shows. So it's just something
Mm.
that always has resonated with me. The notion that, we tend to see danger and chaos as being a point of repression. Like
Hmm.
some of us feel repressed during those moments, but then others see great opportunity,
Mm.
which is, I think, kind of like, the gist of what it is that you're saying.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I want to maybe we could chat about how mindset affects and kind of filters meaning for us. That somebody could have the same experience and interpret it in different ways. Whether looking at the economy or politics or any kind of situation.
Mm.
So that's creativity. And again, simple choice. Life is a C between B and D. What choices can we make to just to be a little bit more creative? And I'm not saying it has to take a lot of time, you know, with this. It could be even journaling for 10 minutes, or writing or going. I think it's very important that we schedule a white space in our days, to just think and be creative. Because if we just wait in between, and it is those empty spaces are very rare. You know what I mean? It usually fills with other stuff that not as important. I always tell people I think the most important thing is to keep the most important things the most important things. It's kind of a little bit of a tongue twister, but yeah, it's not just about time management, it's about priority management, right? I'm going back to the 24 hours we have in a day. It's setting our priorities. We have the 24 hours in the day, but what are we going to emphasize? What are we going to put first? And like even Dr. Stephen Covey's going back to his book, right? Put first things first, right? And then finally, the fifth C, besides clarity and care and contribution, and creativity, I would say is capabilities. And this quote that I've heard in different iterations, I'm sure your audience has. It's like we don't rise to the level of other people's expectations as much as we fall to the level of our own training. And I think again we have a to-do list which is rapidly growing, but do we have a to learn list? Like what's on everyone's to learn list? And I think we do these things where now if especially if you are spending more time at home or have been spending more time at home and you have more time, like what are you putting on there? Because the future belongs to those learners, right? We have to constantly be upgrading our knowledge, our skills, our own abilities to be more valuable. And I think one of the most important things people could be doing is reading. I did so much reading. I was with so many of our clients. We had reading, challenges, a book a week club, and everything else like that. We got so much engagement, this past year and a half because people, and in book sales, I hear are actually doing really well,
Hmm.
because of everything. And and I just think if somebody has decades of experience and they put into a book, and you could sit down in a few days and read a book or listen to an audible, then you could download decades into days. The average person reading one or two books a year compared to somebody who's doing upwards of 50 books a year. Huge. It's not even like a gap between those who have and those who don't have it. There's also a gap of those who know and those who don't know. And those who know can make better decisions, going back to the power of decisions and choice, more accurate, useful decisions. And so, what's on everyone's to learn list? And my focus, we've covered speed reading in a previous episode on your show. My focus is on meta learning. Learning how to learn. Because I feel like if someone can learn how to learn, like learn how to, what does that mean? Learn how to focus and concentrate, learn how to study better, take notes, understand information better, remember that information, improve their memory. And make better, critical thinking. I think they could apply that towards anything better, whether it's money, management, marketing, martial arts, music, everything gets movement, everything gets better and easier. So those are five. I would also add a, now that I think about it, a 6C. There are probably a lot more 6Cs. I'm curious. People could post this on social media and suggest it, tag us both so we get to see it. Community,
Hmm.
with this where people feel separate, and so distance or apprehensive. I think more and more people need to connect, and who we spend time with is who we become. And and people ask, with the book title Limitless, it's like, how do you become limitless in this limited world? And my answer, I think, really is we do it together.
Well,
Right.
there's that famous line, right? I don't know where it originated from, but you become the average of the five or
Hmm.
six or seven people that you hang out with most.
Yeah, I think it, and that's a, having a positive peer group. We all need somebody to encourage us, to challenge us, to give us hope, to cheer us on. And if you haven't found that person, I would recommend be that person for somebody else.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, I was reading studies on mirror neurons and how they potentially could help. It's part of the in our nervous system where it creates empathy, and we start imitating people around us, right? Who we spend time with. I always tell people to watch because these are the things that imitated WATCH, and of course I use a lot of acronyms and mnemonics. The W say words. We tend to adopt the language patterns of people around us for
Hmm.
sure. The A in watch is your actions. Certainly, we start duplicating the behaviors of people around us. You spend time. That's why they say, like, married couples, they tend to look like each other over time, or they look like their pet or something like that because they're spending a lot of time. But watch your actions. The T in watch, thoughts. Thoughts are really things, and I know you've covered this in episodes. And the C in watch are character.
Hmm.
We tend to have the same standards of the people around us, in terms of integrity also as well. And and that spreads. That's as contagious as anything else. I read this quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but it says, integrity is measured. It's the distance between your lips and your life.
Wow.
Integrity is the distance between your lips and your life. And yeah, so you want to manage your character, and then also the H in is your habits. We've heard the phrase, first you create your habits, then your habits create you. And I really do believe, like, I think Duke University said 40% of our behaviors each day is habitual. We're not even thinking about it. We're just on autopilot, which is great because it conserves, as, cognitive energy, because there's a big load on, coming from life. But did we actually sit down and design those things? And so, yeah, who we spend time with is who we become. If you're around nine broke people, be careful because you're probably going to be number 10, that kind of idea. But having a positive community of people that are supportive, and it's meant for, like, everything. You date back, hunter gatherers, right? Survival. Those who had people watching their back and, had a village were more likely to be able to survive. And so we got to pick our village. um, the African proverb: if you want to go further, you go alone. If you want to go faster, you go alone. If you want further, we go together.
I love that. And you are what you repeatedly do. I definitely
Hmm.
believe that to be true. Have you ever, I'm just curious, had
Yeah.
to unfriend somebody? What do you recommend for people that, like in that situation where they have a friend
Yeah.
group, but there's maybe one or two bad apples that you don't necessarily want to extract their habits and their patterns and energy from?
Yeah. I mean, I think my thing with, we could do anything, but we can't do everything. That's this idea. Is like, everyone has goals. You could do anything, but you can't do everything. And I think the same thing happens with people, not just ideas and things we're implementing, but individuals.
Mm.
Meaning that, you could be a great friend, but you can't put all your energy everywhere because there's always this, that it could deplete you. And my feeling generally with that is that if somebody's drowning, certainly I want to help that person, right? And if I have, but if that person's going to pull me down and I'm going to drown also, and then I can't be there for my family and my friends, and people are counting on me, then that could be an interesting choice point.
Some people also just don't want the help.
This is true. Some people, like, there's some things, and I don't know who's listening to this that needs to hear this, but some things, like, if you're in a storm right now, some things you can only learn in a storm, for sure. And then also, some people create a storm and they're upset that it rains, So I don't know, like, but yeah, when it comes to people, having a positive peer group is important, but it's about energy, right? And it's like some people are energy vampires. Some people are batteries included, but there's some people just, I don't know where their batteries are, but they're stealing your batteries. They're stealing your dreams, they're stealing your hope. And some people could actually be sincere, meaning they could have positive intent, because that's, the road, right, is paved with positive intentions. Um, they don't want to, maybe they're saying like, why are you always listening to, Genius Life and reading all those books and, listening to, and or eating all those foods and stuff like that. But, maybe they're saying it because they don't want to lose you, because you're growing and, they want to stay connected to you. Or maybe they don't want you to get your hopes up, or it can have some kind of positive intent. But they can be sincere, but they can be sincerely wrong also as well. So I think you can still love, especially if it's family or friends, you can still love them, but it doesn't mean you have to spend a whole lot of time with them, and having borders again and boundaries. You make sure when you say yes to somebody or something, we're not consistently saying no to ourselves.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, certainly this isn't the case for everybody, but we do live in a time that seems to applaud, at least to some degree, victim mindset.
Mhm.
Now there's an emotional home for people that just live in this persistent state of victimhood. And I think that's really unfortunate as well.
Yeah, I think, and this is all about, for me, it's all about maintaining our agency, our responsibility, our accountability, because I mentioned this on a previous episode with you, but it's, when I got to spend time with Stan Lee, I was like, who's your favorite superhero? And he says, Iron Man. And he's like, Jim, who's yours? And I said, Spider-Man, because he had the Spider-Man tie on. And Spider-Man was one of my favorite because he was like, I wasn't really smart back in high school, but I was definitely like kind of bullied and awkward. And, but, and I still reverse things, Max. And, sometimes maybe because of my, my head injuries and stuff, when I read, sometimes I reverse things or I hear things. I was like, yeah, you're right. With great, and he's, because when I said Spider-Man, he says, with great power comes great responsibility. And I reversed it. I was like, you're right. And the opposite is also true. With great responsibility comes great power. When we take responsibility for something, we have great power to make it better. But, making complaining and making excuses, it doesn't feel like it's taking a whole lot of responsibility. And it's just, if anything, it takes up a lot of energy and a lot of time that could be used to making things better. And some people, when people are complaining, like most people, honestly, this it's called the spotlight effect. The spotlight effect is where we emphasize like what people are thinking about us, or if even they're thinking about us at all, right, in terms of comparison and everything. But I would say that, and some people are just happy that it's you, that you're going through all this stuff, and they're just happy, but but it doesn't affect real change. And so I think it's important for us to take personal responsibility. Even if I was to talk to the 9-year-old version of myself that was, really strong, I would say like, hey, you are 100% responsible for your life. And that's kind of harsh, but the truth is, yes, if where we are right now, it's been shaped by our past experiences, external factors, the expectations of other people and everything. But we are 100% responsible for our life right now and moving forward. And when we claim responsibility and agency, we have the power to make things better. Because if what's the alternative? Like we just, complain. I mean, like, yes, we can complain and it could be true. And so what? Like what has changed in our life?
So well said. How can we become better learners? You talked about meta learning
Hmm.
before, but I mean, I think like this whole process of knowledge acquisition, retention, and utilization. How can we
Yeah.
become better at that? I'm also really interested in this topic. I'd love if you could speak to this.
Yeah.
The idea of verbal fluency.
Hmm.
You listen to some people, such as yourself, such as Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, people
Hmm.
with profound skills when it comes to verbal fluency, being able to like not just retain knowledge, but to spit it out like
Hmm.
like a linguistic surgeon. I think that's a skill that a lot of people, especially with the proliferation of podcasts and apps like Clubhouse and things like that, really
Right.
want. So if you have, yeah,
Yeah.
how can we better achieve
Do
that?
you think there's a parallel between that and being able to express yourself, not just like verbally, so people could hear it auditorily, but also through writing? Do you think
Hmm.
some people that, in your background have,
There's
as a,
probably a correlation. I think I mean, some people are better writers than they are
hmm,
speakers. Some people are better speakers than they are writers. Some people are great at both.
yeah, I mean, and also how it presents itself. Part of it, was definitely trained. So I just need to address the thing that I wasn't like born to any degree. I'm successful in those kind of areas. It's definitely not something that I was born with. It's something that was trained through patience, through persistence, through practice. And so it's definitely not a natural gift for me. My teachers would have been surprised I read a book, dude.
Hmm.
Like if none, much less wrote a book. I was on the debate team for literally one day. And so I joined because I needed to up my my criteria to be getting into school and stuff like that back in high school. And I was just like, I can't do this. I was like so paralyzed. I mean, I think a lot of it also comes from the amount of input I have
Hmm.
in terms of reading. So I get to read and see the different styles from all the different authors, and see certain things I like, certain things. There's no such thing, I believe, as necessarily in a lot of ways a good or bad memory. I think there's more of a trained memory and untrained memory. It certainly helps that I can remember these quotes, my sayings, over pretty easily and effortlessly, just because that muscle has been flexed for so many years.
Do you write them first? Like, what's
Yeah.
your process like?
Yeah, if I see a great quote in a book, I'll highlight it. I will write it down or put it in a notepad.
Hmm.
I'm also a little practice because some of it is spaced repetition where I'll look at it pretty every so often, and even comment with these quotes. If I come up with my own quote, I'll comment it on on your Instagram or other peers because they'll post something. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting on kindness, or responsibility or accountability, or growth, and then I'll put like my quote there. So then I get to see it. So the repetition definitely helps. Um, and so, and also it's personally meaningful for me, meaning that, when you tie something to your purpose, it's a whole lot easier. Just like when people learn something and they're interested in that topic, and they have higher fidelity and they're able to not only learn it better, but retain it longer also as well. When it comes to a model of accelerated learning, and we've covered in different portions of these, and maybe you could put in your show notes, in previous episodes. Um, let me show you my model for it. This is my framework for accelerated meta learning, and I'll make this interactive with everyone who's listening because I would actually love to ask you. I'll run you through the model. All right, so. If you're not working out and or driving or something that's dangerous, like maybe take notes on this, and that'll work. So I want everyone to take out a piece of paper and just think about an area of your life where you feel stuck, and I did this on a podcast on how to get unstuck. It was this story where this truck driver wasn't paying attention, as often we don't pay attention in life, and he ends up going underneath a bridge, and the bridge is too low for his cargo, and he gets stuck. And so what do we do? That's like what we do in life. Sometimes we're not paying attention, we hit something, we get stuck, immobilized, and what do? You just start putting on the gas, and sometimes we like, oh, we're stuck in this relationship, I'm stuck in this button, I have to work harder, and then he just gets more and more stuck, right? And then he tries to back out, and by that time he can't anymore because he's really in there. And then all this traffic starts building up behind him, obviously, and it starts to really, really build up. And crowds start showing up, wondering what's going on, getting out of their cars and everything. And then emergency vehicles come, and they don't know what to do. They start pushing like the truck through the bridge, and nothing. They start trying to pull it out, nothing. And then there's this 6-year-old child, there watching all this with his parents, and he was like, why don't you let out some of the air in the tires? He did it. The truck came down, and obviously it came out because what the adults wanted to do is they wanted to blow up they were going to destroy the truck,
Hmm.
right? And that's kind of like the elusive obvious. And I think sometimes, even when you're looking at health and the state of health, sometimes the elusive obvious is, it's right there in front of us. That a child could see it. But there's so much complexity out there, and anybody can they make things more complex. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with complexity, but sometimes people use it to create, chaos and confusion. And sometimes it's, the simple answer is sometimes the best. So I want to think about an area you feel stuck, where you feel like, and limitless is not, let's get clear. Limitless is not about being perfect, right? Limitless is about advancing. It's about making progress, not comparing yourself to anybody else, but, who you were yesterday, or maybe the best version of yourself. For me, it's always been, who do I want to make proud? It's always been the same answer. I got this question like 15 years ago. Like, who do you want? Why are you doing what you do? Because I think purpose plays a big role in what motivates us to excel, right? Um, who are we doing it for? Who's counting us to be, on our A game, right? To be able to show up really well. And for me, I want to make proud two people, right? And a lot of people, when I say that, they automatically think of, parents or something. And that's actually never. I mean, I want them to be, but I have no control over whether or not people perceive that, or kids or whatever. But I always want to make that 90-year-old version of myself proud, the 90-year-old me.
Hmm.
And then, and then the 9-year-old me, Thinking about that 9-year-old boy who was labeled broken, by a teacher, or, bullied and everything else. I want that boy to be proud of who he's becoming. But that's my purpose. Going back to that, so feel like where you're not making progress, and maybe where you feel like you're in a box, everyone, and that box, and maybe it's a health, maybe it's your health or wellness, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's financial or impact. That box is by definition three-dimensional. So the three forces that contain that box, but there are three forces that will liberate you out of that box. And I call it the limitless model. And going to answer your question for meta learning, draw a Venn diagram. So I want everyone to draw three intersecting circles, and kind of like Mickey Mouse, two ears that overlap and a face that overlap with those two ears. And even if you can't draw it, just imagine it. And even if you can't imagine it, because people then imagine you can imagine it, right? And then, so I'm going to illustrate those three dimensions by three M's, right? The last one, the face, I'll start with, which is the one on the bottom, are the methods. Those are the methods of accelerated learning: how to remember names, how to learn a language, how to memorize a TEDx talk or a toast at a wedding, how to read faster. Those are methodologies. And, in the case of maybe health, maybe it's methods for intermittent fasting, right? Or whatever, fitness, or whatever happens to be, exercise. Everybody knows the methods, but if they're still stuck in a box, then something's not being addressed, right? Two forces. Sometimes they're invisible. So those are the first two circles. The first one is your mindset. Right. And we alluded to that, in the beginning. Mindset for me, very specifically, is the set of assumptions and attitudes. It's attitudes and assumptions about something.
Hmm.
So your mindset about health. What are your attitudes and assumptions about health? What are your attitudes, assumptions about money? What's your attitude? Because that's certainly going to affect things, right? Your attitudes, assumptions about relationships, and what it means to be, you know, um, a good friend. Attitudes is assumptions also about yourself. So let's start there. So three things I know would fall in that circle for everybody, and people could write this down. What I believe is possible, right? Because someone could learn a method on how to get super fit or cut or whatever, right? But if their mindset is I don't believe it's possible, then they're still stuck in that box,
Right.
right? They can learn a methodology for remembering names and faces, but if they believe, oh, I'm too old, I'm really dumb, I was able, then they're still stuck. So mindset, what I believe is possible. Second one, what I believe I'm capable of. Because somebody could believe it's possible for you, Max, but they might not believe they're capable of it,
Hmm.
right? And so that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, the method, they're not even going to do the method, because all behavior is belief driven, right? And so, I always tell people, like, people come. I did just this yesterday morning when I was speaking. People at the break are like, oh, Jim, I'm just really have a horrible memory. I just say, look, stop. If you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them, right? Because like whatever, your brain is like this supercomputer, and your self talk is the program it will run. So if you tell yourself, I'm not good at remembering names, you will not remember people's names, because you just program your computer not to,
It's
right?
a limiting belief, right?
It certainly is. In there, in Limitless, I talk about 7 lies to learning, because I think learning precedes everything, right? And whatever you're going to apply that to. And one of the lies is like genius is born. Like people either have, but we just talk about how genius is built, right? And different things, or how your memory is fixed, right? And like your shoe size, and it's absolutely not true, right? And so we debunk those lies. A lie for me stands for, of course, stands for something. Limited idea entertained.
Hmm.
It's a limited idea that you're entertaining. It's not necessarily true that you're too old, or you're not smart enough, or you're not capable. It's just an idea that we're giving it certainty when it doesn't have to have it. You know what it is? It's just a bunch of BS, right? Belief systems, right? So everything stands for something. It's all the negative belief systems that we have. But going back to mindset, what I believe is possible, what I believe I'm capable of. And the third one I'll throw in there, if we want to get really raw in this conversation, what you believe you deserve. In terms of, I think a lot of times, like, people might think it's possible, or maybe they're capable of it, but they self sabotage, right? Because they don't believe they deserve it, because of something, expectations, opinions of parents, or whatever it is, or, past something, they were hurt in a relationship or whatever. They don't believe they deserve that money. They don't deserve to be healthy. If somebody doesn't believe it's possible for them to heal, or they don't believe they deserve to be healthy and heal, what are those methods going to do for them, right? So these are the things that need to be addressed. We talk about different strategies in the book, but then there's also, there's talk therapy, right? There's There's things that people could do with plant medicine, and stuff like that. There's EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping, right? EMDR. There's all kinds of strategies, self hypnosis, a lot of strategies. But how can you address it unless you pinpoint it, right? Otherwise, if you're not the beginning point of anything for people to change is awareness. And some people aren't even aware, and they're wondering why. How do come I know all this stuff and I'm not doing any of this stuff, right? Because that first M is not being addressed. And then,
I started doing talk therapy over the
Mhm.
course of the pandemic for the first time in my adult life. And my therapist practices, she specializes in EMDR.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm a fan.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. And then tapping is just like an extension of that that you can do on your own,
Hmm.
right? It's so cool.
Yeah, there's so many resources that are available for people, who are just looking, and willing to do their research. And I appreciate everybody who's even on that path because, I believe that there's a version of ourselves that we haven't met yet, and the goal is to keep showing up every single day, right, until we're introduced to that person, until we get to meet that person. But so first of all, it's mindset. I put that first because initially, Limitless was a book all on methods. It was just everything what I teach, for individuals and organizations on how to accelerate their learning and stuff. But before I hit send to my publisher, I was like, okay, this is my first book. I got to get this right. I want to be proud of this myself. Will 100% of the people read this book get, the results that they're hoping for? And my honest answer was no way, they won't, because they're not doing because I'm not addressing these two other areas, right? A lot of people know what to do, but they don't do what they know. Because the truth is, people know what they should be doing, but common sense is not common practice. So what keeps us from it? Mindset. The second M, the final M, is motivation, right? And I could break down motivation, and we could put accelerate learning. And I'd love to talk to you about these three areas. And when it comes to health, because I always like text you about like, hey, I have this person, I have this, or I have this issue, and I'm sure you get a lot of those texts. But so the second M is motivation because you could have a limitless mindset. You could believe it's possible for me to learn this or to have this body or to have this relationship, whatever, and know what to do. But you can be not motivated. So then, if you're not motivated and you're procrastinating, then you're stuck in that box. Because if you self sabotage, for mostly that's a mindset issue. You don't believe you deserve it or you're capable of it. But if you procrastinate, that's definitely a motivation issue,
Hmm.
right? And so you're not motivated to get unstuck. And so motivation for me is three forces, and this is the formula for limitless motivation. If you get anything out of this conversation, my big pet peeve is knowledge is not power. Like that's one of the lies I talk about in there in mindset. You have to dissolve that. Knowledge is potential power. It becomes power when we utilize it, right? Like somebody could read your book, and if they don't apply it, the truth is they're no different than somebody who's illiterate that couldn't read the book in the first place, right? And so all the podcast programs, coaching online, everything, none of it works unless we work, right? That's the truth. That being said, what motivates yourself and how do you motivate other people? You motivate your significant other, your kids to clean their room or to study, your prospects to be able to buy something that you have to offer. Here's the formula: P times E times S3. And I put a lot in, this is my 30th year of teaching. So I have a lot of field testing in terms of why do some people go through our program, 100 people from 195 nations, and some people just don't complete it at all. P times E times S3. P, we've already mentioned, is purpose. All right. It's interesting. I had this encounter with somebody that I wouldn't say as a friend, but an acquaintance. And as context, this person was very unhealthy. I mean, like tipping point. I was like, he's a walking time bomb.
Hmm.
And friends, family, acquaintances, we were all just like, hey, why don't you stop doing this or start doing this? The thing never changed, right? And eventually has a heart attack, almost dies, and he goes back to his old lifestyle,
Wow.
right? And and but I see him on the street recently, and I was like, I didn't even recognize him, and because he looked familiar, but I was like, he was very different. And not only does he look younger and healthier, but he had just this glow about him. And I was like, like what happened? I was like, I'm just curious. Like he's like, oh, I'm doing this and this and I'm like, yeah, well, we've been telling you that for years. You should be doing that. Why are you doing it now? He's like, I came back from a business trip and then my daughter was hysterical, like crying out of her mind. And when she finally stopped, she had a dream that I died and I wasn't, there and this whole thing. And once he's like, everything changed, right? That's purpose, right? Purpose for a lot of people, it's not. Anyone can get intellectual cognitive purpose. Oh, I want to hit these goals because I want to make more money and I want to. Everyone knows that, but if they don't feel it, they don't do anything about it, right? And I always go back to feelings because that's even core to memory. Information by itself is forgettable, but when you tie emotion to something, it becomes unforgettable. It's just like Maya Angelou's, saying that people forget what you say, they'll forget what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel,
Hmm.
right? And then, but especially that's other people. But when we think about ourselves, like what are the things that we're remembering, the things that we feel? And if we don't feel that purpose, we're not going to do anything about it. So my big thing is get it out of your head and put it in your heart, right? That's the formula: head, heart, hands. Even if you look at the three M's, mindset's head, motivation's heart, and method is the hands, the how you're going to actually use this stuff, right? So you're going from head to your heart to your hands. And if you're just keeping your head, you have KPIs, goals, vision, whatever it is, but you're not acting with your hands because we're not logical. We're just not. We're biological, certainly. You think about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. We're just this chemical soup, right? And so, if you're a person like, that you want to motivate, this is for yourselves. But if you want to motivate your spouse or your kids or someone to buy, people don't buy logically; they buy emotionally, and they justify logically, right? So you got to get them to purpose. Now, here's the thing: that's the first part. Somebody can have limitless purpose and still procrastinate, not be motivated. You need E, and you're an expert at this. E stands for energy. A lot of time, let's say somebody's not sleeping, they have a newborn child, or they're freaked out with the pandemic and everything that's going on. They haven't slept in 3 nights. They're not going to be very motivated to work out. They're just not, right? Because exhaustion will make a coward out of anybody,
Hmm.
right? It'll just stall everything. If, let's say, I say, people see photos of me with Elon or Oprah or these people. We bonded over books. That's my secret, right? I'm just very well read, and and these people, leaders are readers, right? And so, if to get through a book a week, the average person who just reads like 200 words a minute, about 45 minutes a day, right? The average book has about how many I don't know how many words you have in your book, but on Amazon they
I
say,
think about 80,000, 80
yeah,
to 100,000, something like that,
which
if
is
I recall
which
correctly.
is more than the average book,
Yeah.
but the average book has about 64,000 around. So the average person reads 200 words a minute. So that takes 320 minutes to get through a book. Sounds like a lot, but if you divide that by 7, that's about 45 minutes a day,
Hmm.
right? You triple your reading speed, like 15 minutes a day, right? So that's why it's not, but 45 minutes a day, let's say you want to do that. That's your goal, to be motivated to read 45 minutes a day, but you just ate a big processed meal and you're in a food coma, right? Energy's down, then you're not going to be motivated, right? And so it has to be addressed. Stress takes a lot of energy out of the system. So it's not just about time management, priority management. What about energy management, right? And here's the thing: you do not have energy. You're like, yes, that's the problem. I do not have any energy. You do energy. You know what I mean? A big part of what we teach with quick learning, the principle is you take your nouns, you turn them into verbs, meaning people hypnotize themselves. Like I think your show, my show, it's about transcending. Big part of it is ending the trance, transcend, right? You end the trance about what's possible. And part of it is coming from the outside, marketing, media saying you're broken and you just like, fear, everything else like that. So that's a trance, but also it's self hypnosis. When you say, I don't have creativity to write today, you don't have creativity, you do creative things, right? I don't have focus to get things done. You don't have focus, you do focus, right? So we could hypnotize ourselves with the language saying, I have this, as opposed to I could do this. And so going back to energy, you don't have energy, you do things to help create energy, right? So if you're stressed all the time, that's taking, energy out of the system. If you're on energy vampires, taking energy out of the system, right? If you're not exercising, you're not generating energy. If you're not sleeping, so on. So you need to optimize your energy. Things that everything that you talk about on your show. And then finally, somebody could have the P and the E, purpose and limitless energy, and still not be motivated. And I was thinking, like, because I know people who are fit in that category, but they're still not doing this stuff. And I was like, oh, that thing can be too big. Like, oh, I want to meet the love of my life and live happily thereafter. I want to have that perfect body, or I want to get 1 million followers, or whatever it is, right? Build the next unicorn. That's way too big. So S3 in the equation, the final part, small, simple steps.
Hmm.
I think one of the things that halts our progress and demotivates us is if you're intimidated by something or you're confused. And we know a confused mind doesn't do anything, right? So clarity is power, small, simple steps. We've had on our show people like James Clear about atomic habits, tiny habits, Dr. BJ Fogg, break things down into small, simple steps. And so here's the magic thing. So if you want to work out and you're no, that's you want to be motivated to work out, right? As your body moves, your brain grooves. Exercise is probably one of the most documented thing that's good for your brain, right? It's good for your heart, it's good for your head, right? Brain derived neurotropic factors, all of that. But if you're not doing that, and I don't just mean working out, I mean just like moving throughout the day. Let's start like there. But if you're not doing that, maybe that's too big and that's too intimidating. A small, simple step, put on your running shoes, right? It's the hard part is like getting into the gym, right? If you want to get your kids to floss their teeth, they're just not doing it. Floss one tooth, right? No one's going to stop at one tooth. They want to clean the room, just get them to put one sock in the hamper, right? Inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's too hard. That's just true, right? And if someone can't read 45 minutes a day, I totally get it. That's brand. Open up the book. How about that, right? Right. Read one line, and consistency, little by little, a little becomes a lot, right? So that's the equation I would say. And you could take this and superimpose it for yourself, but also if you need to motivate somebody else, say you need them to feel the purpose because without reasons, you won't get the result. 100%. Are they just not having energy? Because some people, and you could do this at a global scale too. Like if you look at what people think, like just what's in the media sphere, about social justice, about, pandemics, everything, you could break things down into mindset, motivation, and methods, about purpose. And energy doesn't have to be just physical. It could be capital, right? It could be resources, at a micro level or at a community, nation, global, macro level. And then finally, the last one are methods. And I'll leave everybody with this because I want to ask you a question about this model where mindset crosses over with motivation, because there are other words that you hear in the personal development or performance, where mindset and motivation cross over. You have inspiration. I'm gonna give everyone three eyes. Inspiration, like what does an inspiring speaker do or an inspiring movie do for you? It changes your mindset about what's possible and it gives you some little drive and some purpose and motivation, right? But you're inspired, but you don't know what to do, right? Because you don't have the methods. Where mindset crosses over with methods, you have the second eye, which is ideation, right? You believe it's possible in your mind and then you're capable of it and you know what to do, but you don't have the motivation, right? So it's just an idea. And that's pretty common. A lot of people have a lot of ideas. And finally, where motivation and methods cross over, you have the third and final eye, and that's implementation.
Hmm.
Someone's motivated, they have purpose, they have energy, and they have the methods. And so that's implementing. That person's going to be implementing for a long time, but they're still could be stuck in that box because they're only going to be able to achieve what their mindset allows because it's not covering mindset. And then where all three M's and all three I's collect right in the middle, here's a fourth and final I, that's integration. Right in the middle, the center where all three M's and I's connect, that's integration. And for me, that's the limitless state. That's the state where it's just who you are, right? And so when I'm talking to somebody who's excels like yourself, when I'm having conversations with somebody about getting a certain result is I believe when you're talking about the genius life is that genius leaves clues. That if somebody is extraordinary in an area with their finances and their relationship, with their health and wellness, right? With their learning, right? That they're doing certain things other people aren't doing. There's a method behind what looks like magic to the rest of the world. And so when I'm looking for my superpower that I developed over time out of necessity. My inspiration was my desperation. I was on the other side of the bell curve that made the other one like even possible, right? So I struggled so much. And so out of necessity, I had to come up with this, and then coaching people on how to do this. When I talk to you, if I want to talk to you about longevity and energy and all the stuff that you've done with, in your research and your journalism and your writing, is I'm breaking things down into mindset, motivation, and methods. And if there's this stopgap between where they are and where they want to be, you have to address the bottleneck, right? Because a part of this is we're unlimiting these areas, right? Because if somebody is like not having energy so if somebody doesn't have what they want, I'm like, okay, do they believe it's possible? Do they believe they're capable of it? Do they believe they deserve it? And if that's fine, great. But if it's not, then that has to be addressed first. And then motivation, do they have purpose? Or maybe it's here, but they're not feeling their purpose, or do they not have energy? Do they not have capability, right? Because they're stressed out of their mind or their spouses, like berating them and taking all their energy and drive. Are they making it too confusing and too overwhelming? Like thinking is good, but overthinking it and wanting to be perfect, perfectionism, that's not good, right?
Right.
So maybe not breaking down into tiny little steps, or maybe they're using old methods for health and wellness. maybe they're using old methods for learning, like rote repetition, or, like the old study ways, or old methods for dating, or, whatever. And it's just not good for the times. And so, when we're talking, you and I, about longevity or health or recovery, my thoughts are like, what are your beliefs about your mindset around health? Like, what are the things that you believe? What are the things you're embarrassed to admit, like that you used to believe, lies? Like, because I would willing to bet, for the people who are really exceptional in these areas, there's a common thread of beliefs. Like, do you believe health is something that's static? Like, a lot of people in most of society think like, hey, it's just like, this is what I'm worth financially, or this is just what I'm worth in a relationship, or this is what health is, just I either have it or I don't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of health as being as just having a nice body, having
Hmm.
a six pack,
Right.
having a lean toned midsection, and strong muscular arms. But health is so much more than that.
Right. And that's their mindset. That's their assumptions, or maybe even and some people have an attitude around health too, that
Yeah.
it's either boring or it's something that's.
Well, I think some people feel like they don't deserve it. They can't attain it. When people have, uh, it's sort of like turning a cruise ship around for
Mm,
some people, because they feel like their optimal health is so far from their present state. But but I love the idea of small, simple things that you can do every day,
yeah.
because over the long term, those small, simple things add up. And what you were saying about letting perfect be the enemy of the good,
Right.
that's a major problem in health. There's like
Yeah.
there's often this perfectionist mindset, and it's propagated by influencers for the
Hmm.
most part. I mean, it's not propagated by scientists. You're
Right.
not going to see this notion of perfectionism in the nutritional literature.
Mm,
Um, so I think that that's the kind of the message that comes across sometimes, especially via social media, and also mainstream media,
yeah.
movies, and things like
Or
that.
maybe people might have picked up, when it comes to health, like it's, like, oh, it's just genetics or something like that. And that would keep people stuck in a box,
Yeah,
right?
or
If
that
they believe.
you have to go to the gym and you have to have an hour long workout, and
Yep.
for you to have had a good workout, you have to leave the gym sweating. You've got
Hmm.
to be sore the next day. None of those are indicators of having had a good workout, by the way.
Right.
So
And those are assumptions, and those are that assumptions will keep people stuck, right? Those are assumptions that are not necessarily true. And just same thing with fitness, they have around food.
yeah, people have misconceptions around food. That you have to eat a certain way. You have to be either strict keto, that keto is the best
Hmm.
diet for health, which is not true. I mean, it's
Right.
indicated for certain therapeutic purposes, and I've talked ad nauseum about the potential benefits of a ketogenic diet. But then we have low carb dieters, and we have low fat dieters, and then you have vegan voices that are telling you that if you
Hmm.
ever eat animal products, you're gonna develop heart disease and kneel over and croak. Um, so yeah, there are a ton of misconceptions when it comes to diet. When in reality, it's sometimes the simplest answer. What was what you said about the most obvious,
Yeah.
oftentimes being the most oblivious?
Yeah, it's the elusive obvious, they
Yeah.
call it. It's kind of like, this is kind of I don't know. I don't know we should look it up, when the toilet was invented, but I guarantee you toilet paper wasn't invented that same year. Right? So, and it
Right.
probably was a decade or more. So that's the elusive obvious, right?
That's
And
interesting.
so it's kind of like, with the child looking at the tires. And so this idea here is that even when we're talking about mindset, some people are so stressed out about their diet that it negates potentially any benefit they're going to get from it, because of this. It's not just what you eat, it's how you eat, right? And the feelings that you're bringing into that process. And some people are eating, they're not even present. They don't even taste the food, right? Or they're doing a million different things, at the same time, or they're working. So they're not even in that kind of rest, digest place.
That's an important point. I think one tip that will help pretty much anybody is to be present with your food.
Hmm.
To stop eating while you are distracted, watching TV or on your computer. There are studies that show that people tend to consume about 15% more calories when they're eating food while distracted by an e-reader or watching
Hmm.
TV, et cetera. And so many people, I mean, and again, not letting perfect be the enemy
Right.
of the good. I will eat in front of my TV too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'll whole bag, um, paleo pretzels, paleo
Oh,
puffs,
I didn't even
whatever it
I
is,
didn't even know that phrase, whole
smart sweets.
bag.
Yeah, you heard it here first. It's a Genius Life original. I will whole bag. There's this pretzel brand. What are they Quinn pretzels. Dude, have you ever tried a Quinn paleo
I have
pretzel?
not.
They have a new flavor. We're not sponsored by them. Garlic pepper.
But contact Genius Life.
Yeah, sponsor us. So good. And I'll go through the whole bag.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding you. My brothers look at me like I'm an insane person.
Yeah, and again, for all this, we don't have to like. The idea behind this is thinking is good, but overthinking and wanting to be perfect, I don't think anyone would say that's good for anybody. So this would just be one example of a conversation I would have about our mindset that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, again, most people we're learning all the methods. People are posting all the methods, or we're hearing about it. But I just think a big part of success is just the invisible stuff that's going on in our minds that came there through our upbringing and expectations, and we delete and we distort, and we sometimes we generalize things to kind of fit a certain kind of mold that around certain expectations, and yeah, and it can lead to erroneous behaviors, and also certainly a skew in the results we're hoping for.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something about you were talking about the benefits of reading
Mhm.
in regard to knowledge and language acquisition. Is there any functional difference between reading a physical book versus listening to an audiobook? Because some people prefer to listen to
Yeah,
audiobooks.
I like both. I mean, I like watching YouTubes for your podcast, which I'm a fan, and I also like to listen to it also as well. When it comes to reading, I think it's the best way to compress information. I think reading is to your mind what exercises to your body. I just think it's a powerful way to kind of keep your brain just fit. That being said, yes, there is. In terms of uh, audio and like audiobook and reading from a print or digital, let's talk about that first. Um, in terms of retention and comprehension, it's actually skews for reading an actual book instead of listening to it.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons is the contributing factor. This is kind of obvious, but when you're listening to a podcast or listening to an audiobook, we're usually doing something else,
Mm,
right? You're working out, you're driving, you're cleaning the house. So that's just your attention, and potential distractions because you're multitasking. And I think that's a big contributing factor. Usually when someone's reading, they're just reading. They're not driving or working out or cleaning their house. Right. So I think that's a big part. For me, I prefer physical books. I don't know. How are you? Like digital when I travel because I don't want to. I read a lot, so I don't want to like carry. I'm traveling for the next few weeks, so I don't want to be carrying like lots of books. That's
yeah.
not practical in luggage and everything. But
Right. I often do both. Like I have your book, the physical
mhm.
copy, but then I also like to be able to listen to it
Yeah,
via audiobook when I'm sitting in my car. And I know a lot of people who have bought, my books, Genius Foods or The Genius Life. Oftentimes the people who prefer audiobooks will buy the audiobook first.
yeah,
But then there's so much information that they tend to
mhm,
then end up going and also buying the physical book
yeah.
so that they can highlight and dog ear pages and things like
Yeah,
that.
I'm a big fan of that. With our audiobook, we did something where I read the chapter, and then I had a friend in studio come in, and she would ask me questions about that chapter. So we had these little discussions after every single one. So there's like it's you could do more, you could do various things, right? My thing is there's no right or wrong. I just want people to do it. Digital readers are interesting. They're convenient, just like digital note taking is convenient. Like some people like to handwrite notes, other people like to digitally note take. And when they're tested, when students are tested, whether for comprehension and retention, between handwriting notes and digital note taking, handwriting notes actually score better.
Wow.
Um, and digital is obviously better for storage, and it's obviously better for sharing with other people. Some people like handwriting, and one of the reasons why is because a lot of people could type pretty fast. Like a lot of people who are listening to this could type, pretty much as fast maybe as we're speaking, but you can't possibly handwrite that fast,
Right.
right? And so it forces you to filter the information, right? To listen for the most valuable information, and as you're organizing in your notes. And with note taking for me, I've done multiple podcast episodes, and I just have different ways of taking notes. For me, I put a line right down the page because I like handwriting notes, and then digitizing them. But on the left side, I capture. On the right side, I create. So really simple. On the left side, I'm taking notes. On the right side, I'm making notes.
Hmm.
Meaning it's kind of like akin to left brain, right brain. And this is way oversimplification, right? left brain logical, right brain like imagination, creativity. But it's kind of like on the left side, I would capture, oh, this is how you remember names. This is the best, genius foods, right? This is the best time that, how to optimize your sleep. You're capturing. But if your attention is going to go somewhere else, like you're going to get distracted, your imagination is going to pull you somewhere else. I'd rather it go on the right side of the page, right? Your creative side. So then you're just going to write your impressions of what you're capturing. Oh, this is, how does this relate to what I already know? How am I going to use this, right? When will I use this? Because I think honestly, for every hour you spend listening to a podcast or reading a book or on Clubhouse, I would say you had to spend at least another hour, like one to one, putting that stuff into action, and so schedule. I think one of the most important performance, tools that we have, personal growth tools we have, is our calendar. And we schedule when we schedule everything. We schedule our meetings there. People, parents might schedule PTA meetings, investor meeting, whatever, doctor's appointments. But are we scheduling our own growth? Like we know if people don't write and schedule their meditation time, then you're busy. That all that void's gonna be filled, and at the end, like, oh, I didn't meditate, or I didn't work out today. Like I didn't do my Wim Hof breathing, or my, you know what I mean. If it's not scheduled, so I think it's just really important to get in the habit of doing that.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky. My assistant Sydney, she schedules my workouts in the morning for me. But it's like a routine for me that I've adopted
Hmm.
and that I feel really good about. I like to work out fasted, and I like to eat around noon. So that means that the 10 to 11:30 block for me, uh, 5 days a week generally. That's like when I like to hit the gym. It makes
Between
it,
10, yeah.
yeah, between 10 and 11.
Yeah, and that consistency is important. And for people that, I really do believe the treasure we seek is hidden in our daily routines. So I'm a big fan of having morning and evening routines and training it. And I think for habits, the most important thing is, you want to make what's good for you. You want to make it as easy as possible, and you want to make the things that are not so good for you, more difficult, right? So if touching your phone is a thing at night or in the morning, like moving the phone into the other room, or the out of armor, that would make it, you know, easier to do the good things
It
and
increases the
live a better life.
friction.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Even, like during, when we were all locked down and everything, I would put when we're going to the gym, I would put like a kettlebell right in my office doorway. So I would just trip on it, so, but I made it easy. Like for me at night, like first thing in the morning, I want to drink a cup of a glass of water, room temperature, but it's easier for me to go up to my bedroom and put the glass there the night before. Right. So I make it really easy and my probiotics are right there. Right. And so, I think it's so important. My journal's there. I have a fiction. The only three things on my bed on my nightstand. That could be a good podcast question. Actually, I never thought about like what do you have on your nightstand?
That is a really good
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because I'm just thinking about like what's there. Because I'm just thinking,
So tell me,
yeah,
what are the
yeah.
three things that you have on your
For
nightstand?
me, I have an Oura ring. Like I have a sleep monitoring metric thing. I have a journal because I write my dreams in there first thing in the morning. So because I think it's important to remember our dreams and do a little gratitude exercise in my journal. And the two other things is I have a fiction book and a glass of water. A fiction book. I don't read nonfiction during night, but I for the longest time when I first learned these strategies, speed reading and stuff, I would just read nonfiction because I felt like I was at such a disadvantage. I lost all these years of not being able to do this stuff, but I found so much value in like fiction reading, and it's been shown to help with empathy,
Hmm.
EQ, the storytelling, the whole creative, imaginative process. But I don't. I like reading that stuff at night. I don't like reading stuff that gets me in my executive brain. I don't read things on psychology and physiology and learning
Interesting.
theory because then my mind will go and I won't. That's not a really good place for me to get into that
Well, it's
parasympathetic.
interesting because you want to be told a story before you go to bed. I mean, that goes back to
There you
us
go.
being
Wow.
children, right?
I didn't even. That's wired in really
Yeah,
early.
it
Yeah.
is. You want to be told a story, whereas nonfiction books are just, it's like facts. It's very much like
Yeah.
left brain,
Very much so.
executive function, morning, yeah, analytical.
What's on your nightstand, man?
Oh man, I have a tray with some black tourmaline stones.
Okay.
I have a good friend who's very much into like the LA spiritual community, crystals and things like that. I can't honestly say that I'm super into that world, but they made it was an argument that at the time was very convincing that having black tourmaline stones by your bed, it basically absorbs negative energy. Okay. Whatever negative energy you're experiencing in your life.
You're going to see Blackthorn, like the sales go through the roof, right? Like,
maybe. They're like these, I got them on Amazon, honestly. It comes in a little baggie and they're like these chalky, really beautiful actually.
Can
like
you
rocks.
put that link in the show notes so I can buy some too?
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. But basically it sucks up negative energy wherever you have it in the house. They say to keep some by your bedside, by like your desk if you spend a lot of time like working in one area. I've got my blue light blocking glasses on my nightstand, which are important to block bright blue light at night when you're trying to wind down, so as to not suppress
melatonin
too significantly your melatonin production. And then I have a little night mask.
You sleep with the night mask?
I don't sleep with the night mask all the time.
If you're waking up at 10 a.m. like you did today,
you'll need something like that. We have Genius Life night masks at thegeniuslife.com. Not so subtle plug. But the reason why I don't sleep with it every single night is because my room doesn't have blackout curtains, but I am a freak. I like to sleep with a pillow on top of my head, which normally does the job.
Okay.
But my cat sleeps with me sometimes, actually most of the time. And sometimes she will wake me up way earlier than I intend on waking up. She likes to, and in particular, when I have the pillow on top of my head, nobody cares about this. I'm just like, she'll reach her paw, which has, of course, razor sharp nails at the end of it to try to like tap me and wake me up. But the claws like hurt.
Yeah.
So I get woke. That's how I get woken up sometimes at 6 in the morning.
I get the pillow thing then.
Yeah. And so at that point, when she does that, then I have to put the mask on because the pillow doesn't work as well because I'm already awake. So anyway, but those are the three things that I have on my nightstand. What a great question.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
You are able to go so deep into the system that we are able to release, to go into the lymphatic system, which is the deepest, thought of inaccessible by humans. And now it is there. And now we can bring down inflammation. And now we can process the deepest parts of our brain by doing these breathing techniques, which result in having a much greater control over our brain, which is the seat of the unlimited power of our mind.